A Horse Walks into a Rehab is one of the most important episodes of BoJack Horseman, not just for the series, but for the character. After the massive downer ending of Season 5 and BoJack's subsequent check into rehab, we actually get to see the fruits of BoJack's rehabilitation. But more importantly, how BoJack's success in rehab doesn't necessarily mean he's putting in the work on himself that actually needs to be done. But through struggle, hardship, and one wild evening across LA, BoJack starts to recognize that he can't just go through the motions. He has to put in the work.
I'm so sorry. I did everything I could.
This episode surprisingly opens up in the aftermath of the episode That's Too Much Man from Season 3, the night of Sarah Lynn's death, shedding further light onto what actually happened at the planetarium. Though we obviously later learn that there's even more to BoJack's deceit here, we immediately learn that BoJack wasn't honest about the circumstances surrounding Sarah Lynn's death.
So I drove to the planetarium and I found her passed out. I called 911 right away, but it was too late.
We get our first hints that BoJack's behavior here was meant more to cover his own ass than to help his friend. BoJack immediately denies knowing where Sarah Lynn got the heroin, despite the fact that it was his. Though, it's also clear that BoJack does have a guilty conscience about this, despite Officer Meow Meow Fuzzy Face's immediate attempts to move past it.
I was in a bad way, and Sarah Lynn followed me down because she thought I was a safe place. What have I done?
Just to be clear, the case is closed.
BoJack's attempts to clear that guilty conscience and come clean to somebody are ignored, but BoJack also verbalizes exactly what he feels he needs after this major wake-up call.
I gotta make some changes in my life. Starting now.
This is followed by BoJack immediately drinking again before he drives home. But we already knew he didn't make those changes after Sarah Lynn's death. We knew it took him years to even check into rehab as we watched him spiral into his rockiest bottom yet. But though this episode shows BoJack's major, seemingly positive progress through rehab, I don't think it actually meant he was making the changes he said he would. We've seen over and over in the series that while under strict structure and routine, BoJack excels and keeps himself out of trouble. We saw this in Season 4 when he was in Harper's Landing. He was a mess until he and Eddie began fixing up the old Sugarman place. Once he had structure and routine in his life, he excelled. And once that was finished, he didn't quite know what to do with himself. We also later see this when he's in prison, but that's obviously down the line. And though it's a huge struggle, BoJack does work his ass off to detox. Every single thing is difficult for him. Group therapy, sleep therapy, hike therapy, art therapy, visiting therapy, plant therapy, yoga therapy, horse therapy. BoJack struggles every single step of the way, but he keeps at it, he keeps working, and he gets better at it. I love this montage because it actually represents some advice he got but never took back in Season 2.
Every day it gets a little easier.
Yeah?
But you gotta do it every day. That's the hard part. But it does get easier.
And the more BoJack works at rehab, the easier it gets for him. And while detoxing is certainly a major accomplishment, it's clear that BoJack is mostly just getting good at doing rehab. There are many signs that he isn't actually putting the work in to truly unpack the root of his drinking and the root of his traumas.
I came here to take responsibility for myself. Nobody made me drink.
Though BoJack goes through the motions and becomes an engaged, supportive member of the rehab community, he's also actively avoiding a lot of the most important aspects of unpacking his own relationship with drugs and alcohol. Namely, avoiding talking about why he ever started drinking in the first place. Anytime it comes up, BoJack deflects.
Maybe you could tell us when was the first time you drank?
When wasn't the first time I drank? Am I right?
Dr. Champ calls BoJack out on this specifically, but BoJack doesn't budge, to the point where BoJack's deflection actually leads to a regression in his behavior.
BoJack, you can't joke your way through this. Everyone else in this group is trying hard to be honest.
Really? Everyone's being honest?
Through his deflection, BoJack ends up calling out or insulting countless people in his rehab program, and most pointedly, a teenager named Jameson.
I'd rather you not.
She would love to get sober, but still has her friend McCaitlin sneak her water bottles filled with vodka every visiting day.
During the montage early in the episode, you can actually see Jameson's friend sneaking in the vodka. BoJack is shown to be very supportive of the rehab group, even for things that seem incredibly silly or trivial, but the moment he gets called out, he deflects so far that he undermines all of the positive relationships he's made. And on top of this, calling out Jameson leads to the big dilemma of this entire episode. Jameson confronts BoJack for calling her out, and by trying to use the same reverse psychology that Dr. Champ used on him, BoJack actually plants an escape plan into Jameson's head.
You could sneak out the upstairs window after midnight bed check by tying your sheets into a rope and nobody would notice you're gone till wake up. But is that what you really want?
Once Jameson sneaks out, BoJack feels responsible and sneaks out with her to make sure she gets back safe. But this is a symptom of a deeper problem. BoJack's refusal to properly unpack the roots of his issues almost always lead to bigger issues down the road. The story itself is a metaphor for BoJack's own struggles, with his own trauma, with his addiction, with countless aspects of his life. When BoJack fails to address his own insecurities and issues, those things come back to haunt him. This is a microcosm of that pattern. BoJack's deflection from addressing his trauma leads him on this wild goose chase, all because he wasn't prepared to talk about the first time he drank.
I gotta make some changes in my life. Starting now.
When we first see Dr. Champ ask BoJack about the origins of his drinking, this was his response.
When wasn't the first time I drank?
It's funny, though this is a deflection, we actually see that there is also some truth to it. Over the course of the episode, we see multiple flashbacks, each one moving further back into BoJack's life, seemingly showing the first time he drank, and it sheds a ton of light onto BoJack's history. Prior to this, we had actually never seen BoJack drink prior to horsing around. In fact, for all we knew, he didn't drink.
Let me buy you a drink.
Oh, I don't drink.
But through these new flashbacks, we see that BoJack actually had many prior experiences with alcohol. And though if you asked BoJack why he drank, he would say this:
I'm here because I made choices. Nobody made me drink. My addiction didn't pull a knife on me and say, hey, bub, drink this alcohol or I'm gonna strangle you.
The reality is that if we look deeper into the circumstances of each of these times he consumed alcohol, we see there are very clear pressures motivating him into doing it. And each time he seemingly gets something good out of it that also has negative ramifications. The first flashback shows BoJack struggling on the set of Horsing Around, dealing with the nerves of having his first on-screen kiss. Granted, that on-screen kiss was with international supermodel Cindy Crawfish, but regardless, he was awkward and stiff, and he struggled to show any chemistry in this scene. To help him, Sharona spikes his orange juice, which he initially protests.
Oh, no, I don't.
Trust me, it'll loosen you up.
And as it turns out, Sharona was right. BoJack loosens up. The scene goes off without a hitch, and this begins BoJack down a dark path of drinking almost every day while on set. One that eventually leads to Sarah Lynn drinking one of his water bottles filled with vodka, and Sharona taking the fall for it. One of BoJack's deepest regrets. When we go back even further, we see BoJack at a high school party well before Horsing Around. BoJack is awkward and uncomfortable at that party, despite a positive interaction with his classmate Katie. When he's initially offered beer, he starts to decline, but
I'm lifting 178 right now.
You know what? I'll have one beer.
early on at the party, that very jock loudly made fun of BoJack and called him a nerd. The peer pressure of being like the cooler kids in school leads BoJack to have that drink, and initially, it actually seems to work for him. Though he's a bit sloppy, BoJack basically becomes a stand-up comedian at the party, roasting his classmates. Not just a little insight into his pursuit of acceptance through peer pressure, but insight into his pursuit of comedy later as well. He wants to rip on people like the cool kid did. Unfortunately, he also embarrasses Katie, the one person who was nice to him before he became an asshole, basically gaining acceptance from and alienating the exact wrong people.
Want some?
Oh yeah, bartender, one more.
At an even younger age, likely middle school, BoJack walks in on his father cheating on his mother. To distract BoJack from what he saw, he makes him a drink.
Here's to our first drink as father and son.
This was clearly not BoJack's full decision, being coaxed into it, basically being offered a moment of connection with a mostly absentee father, something many children would struggle to turn down. BoJack passes out from drinking, and Butterscotch further manipulates BoJack when he wakes up.
Maybe it's best if we both just forgot about everything that happened tonight.
But saddest of all is the flashback to what is presumably the actual first time BoJack drank. BoJack must have been somewhere around 4 or 5 years old, seemingly after a New Year's party, which also means it was just a day before his own birthday. Seeing his own parents passed out on the couch drunk, BoJack takes a big swig of vodka and curls up with his mother before falling asleep. So when you look at all of these important instances of BoJack's history of drinking, it's clear that what BoJack claims, that nobody made him drink, is only a half-truth. Sure, he made the decision, but every single instance was heavily influenced by the circumstances, by the demand to perform, by peer pressure, by his father, by his mother. There are countless factors in BoJack's life that needed to be unpacked, factors that were going ignored at rehab because he wasn't willing to unpack them. But the saddest thing about BoJack's history of drinking is that when he said,
"When wasn't the first time I drank?" Am I right?
it's very possible that he actually isn't sure.
Ready to sneak back in?
I'm getting too old to sneak in and out of places.
There are countless examples of BoJack's behavior over the course of this evening that show he hadn't actually really been undergoing meaningful change, despite seemingly being successful at rehab. Perhaps the most telling is played off like a joke, but is a complete parallel of BoJack's literal biggest regret in his life, the one that caused him to initially say he needed to change. When Jameson sneaks out, this is why BoJack claims he follows her.
I'm the idiot who helped you escape, so if you OD tonight, then I'm the one who'll have to lie to everyone about what happened.
This is just a little too close to what happened with Sarah Lynn for comfort. There are further examples as they sneak out as well. While in rehab, BoJack is attentive, he listens to everyone in group, he even proves to Jameson that he knows her entire history, at least what she's shared with him. He does well within the structure, but the moment he goes out, the moment he's outside that structure, he's distracted by the drinks at the party, and he misses Jameson saying this.
It's me, Jameson, H.
Unfortunately, when BoJack doesn't hear Jameson say her last initial, this makes his evening a whole lot more difficult when he loses track of her later.
Hey, do you know where Jameson lives?
Jameson H or Jameson Q?
I don't know.
Or Jameson M?
But the events of this entire evening actually go a really long way to help BoJack understand that this work isn't properly being put into himself. For one, each and every one of his flashbacks to his drinking history is triggered by something on his Jameson adventure. When she sneaks out the window, he remembers the plot line on Horsing Around that led him to drink. When they get to the high school party, he remembers his own experience at a high school party. When Jameson talks about her father, he remembers his own experience with his shitty father. And most importantly, his experience with Jameson herself actually helps him realize that he also isn't being fully honest and open in his rehab experience. Early in the episode, BoJack recounts tons about Jameson's life to her.
Your mom died of cancer, your dad stuck you in boarding school and remarried, and now there's a new baby, and no one pays attention to you.
Jameson even lets BoJack in on more of her insecurities, the things that led her to sneak out of rehab that night.
McKaylin told me Dathan was thinking of breaking up with me because I got fat junior year. So I need to go show him that I'm back to being hot, then break up with him for being a shallow buckfoy.
But after they go to her house and he meets her dad, he learns the reality of her situation.
I don't know what to do with Jameson. I've tried everything. I thought she would change after she had her baby, but...
The new baby wasn't Jameson's sibling, it's her own child. Jameson didn't get fat junior year, she was pregnant. BoJack knew all of these details about Jameson's life, but he didn't know the most important context. And this is the wake-up call BoJack needs to realize that he himself is not actually letting everyone in on the most important aspects of his own history and trauma. The fact that he should be approaching it differently. BoJack was nearly done with his stint in rehab, but after this, he checks himself back in for 6 more weeks. And he even starts things differently this time. When he first arrived, he refused to take a selfie with the receptionist, but this time he's truly here to explore what rehab has to offer him. And so even though he doesn't understand it, he takes the selfie. And we see that after this, BoJack really wants to make the necessary changes to live a fruitful life moving forward. And despite his past coming back to haunt him later and an eventual relapse, BoJack really does start to make those changes. He really does become a more rounded person and a better friend. And knowing he's walked that path once means he can eventually do it again. But the first thing that had to happen was a horse had to walk into a rehab.
I stay mellow watching Johnny Two Cellos. He talks cartoons, he's a really cool fellow. He keeps you posted on adult cartoons. If that's what you're into, then grab a spoon and a very big bowl of your favorite cereal. Feels like Saturday morning cartoon material. Johnny Two Cellos, watch him on YouTube. Now enjoy this groove and bust a move.